hidden threat. There were three of us, me, Michael, and our friend Sam. It all started as a joke over beers one evening. Michael had found mention of an abandoned caravan route in the Karakum Desert in an old book. The route supposedly led to a mysterious cave where ancient artifacts were hidden. We laughed, but the more we talked, the more the idea of exploring it captured our imaginations. A month later, we stood at the edge of the desert, our backpacks stuffed with water, supplies, and everything we thought we might need. Each of us carried a map, though they were clearly not very accurate. Scans from the same book Michael had found online. That only added to the sense of adventure. The first day was exhilarating. The sands shimmered with shades of gold and orange. The sun melted into the horizon, and the wind carried the dry scent of the earth. We joked, told stories, and marched confidently forward. By evening, we set up camp and lay on our backs, gazing at the endless stars. But by the second day, things started to go wrong. Our maps indicated there should have been an old well ahead, but when we arrived, there was nothing but sand. Everything felt as though someone had intentionally erased the traces of this route. By noon, the heat became unbearable. The water in our bottles was warming fast, and Michael began complaining about seeing mirages. He spotted what looked like an oasis in the distance and nearly ran towards it until Sam stopped him. We decided to take a break, using a tarp to create some shade and conserve our strength. That evening, we stumbled upon strange tracks in the sand. They weren't animal tracks, but looked like deep grooves, as if something heavy had been dragged across the dunes. The tracks led toward a rocky outcrop that turned out to be more than a hill of sand. It was a stone formation with a massive carved entrance to a cave. We argued for a long time about whether to enter. Sam thought it was a bad idea, but Michael insisted. In the end, we all agreed. We didn't want to return empty-handed. Inside, the cave greeted us with cool air and an eerie atmosphere. The walls were etched with strange patterns I'd never seen before. They looked like scenes from the lives of bizarre creatures, with long arms and unnatural proportions. We moved deeper, lighting our way with flashlights, until we reached a massive chamber. At its center stood an altar, and on it lay a pitch-black shard that seemed to swallow the light around it. "Don't touch it," Sam warned, but Michael was already reaching out. The moment he touched the artifact, everything around us seemed to come alive. The floor beneath us trembled, and a deep, vibrating hum filled the air. We bolted for the exit, but part of the passage had collapsed, blocking our way. Panic began to set in. Then I noticed something. The carvings on the walls were moving. They were transforming into three-dimensional figures resembling the creatures depicted earlier. They slowly descended toward us, their eyes glowing, their hands reaching out. "What do we do?" Sam shouted. Michael, still clutching the shard, seemed to realize something. Without a word, he rushed back to the altar, placed the shard on it, and stepped away. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, with a loud rumble, the ceiling of the chamber began to collapse. We sprinted down a side tunnel, not knowing where it would lead. Luckily, it led us outside. We tumbled onto the sand, gasping for breath and trembling with adrenaline. Looking back, we saw the cave entrance vanish beneath shifting sands, as if it had never been there. "What was that?" Sam finally asked. "Maybe a warning," Michael said quietly, still catching his breath. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." We decided never to return. On the way back, we avoided talking about the cave, but one thing still bothers me. Just before returning to the altar, Michael slipped something into his backpack. He never said what it was. A few days later, we made it out of the desert, exhausted, but alive. Once we reached the nearest town, we all felt a strange unease. Michael became unusually quiet and distant, while Sam and I avoided asking questions. Each of us just wanted to forget the cave and its eerie inhabitants. The next morning, we went our separate ways. Sam left to reunite with his family, while I stayed with Michael at a hotel to rest before our flight home. The following morning, I entered Michael's room and saw him hunched over something wrapped in cloth. "What's that?" I asked, a sinking feeling tightening in my chest. Michael looked up. His eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept. Without a word, he unwrapped the cloth to reveal what he had been hiding, a second shard of that same black artifact. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "You saw what happened in that cave. Why did you take it?" "I couldn't just leave it," he said quietly. "You don't understand. This artifact, it calls to you. I couldn't walk away. I wanted to grab it and throw it out. But as I looked at the shard, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't fear, it was a strange pull, as though the artifact was trying to reach into my mind." "Do you realize what we've unleashed?" I asked, struggling to control my emotions. Michael just shook his head. "Number, I think we've found something that was meant to be found." His words sent a chill through me, but I didn't argue. That night, I barely slept, listening to Michael pacing back and forth. His shadow flickered under the door, and the low hum from the cave seemed to echo in my mind. The next day, we flew home. Michael remained silent the entire flight, clutching his backpack as if his life depended on it. Weeks passed, and I tried to return to normal life, but something inside me had changed. Nightmares plagued me. Visions of those sand figures from the cave, their whispers filling my room even after I woke up. One day I decided to call Michael, but he didn't answer. Worried, I drove to his house and found something deeply unsettling. The doors were locked, the windows were covered, and a faint hum emanated from inside. When I finally got in, the scene inside froze me in place. The room was chaos, books, torn maps of the desert, and drawings of those same cave patterns scattered everywhere. In the center of the room was a table, and on it lay the shard. It wasn't just a shard anymore. It had grown, as if pieces had fused together to form almost a full disc. Michael sat across from it, motionless, his eyes closed. "Michael!" I shouted, rushing toward him. He opened his eyes, and I stumbled back. They were completely black. "This wasn't an accident," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "This artifact isn't just an object. It's a door." "A door to what?" I demanded, panic rising. "To what's been watching us all along. I can feel them." Realizing we had to stop this, I grabbed a thick blanket and threw it over the artifact. Despite Michael's protests, I dragged the shard out of the house. Later, I drove to a remote canyon and hurled the shard into a deep crevice. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I should have destroyed it, but I didn't know how. After that, Michael slowly returned to his old self. His eyes regained their color and he stopped mentioning the cave. But sometimes I catch him staring into the distance, as if listening to something. And recently, he asked me, "Do you hear that hum too?" That's when I realized our story might not be over.